Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Monday morning, March the 28th, 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio podcast from blogtalkradio.com, and chat room is open. And we're going to continue talking this week about dysfunctional families. It's an article I'm just searching on the web, and it's some good stuff. I really think Georgie Boyd, he's done a good job to present the material and talking about the roles that people will play within dysfunctional families and talking about the negative, damaging, sort of negative effects from the learned behaviors and things like this. So it's really quite good information. So hopefully people are getting something out of this. I'm going to try to go back to my regular schedule this week, just doing the Monday through Friday, every morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and in the evenings, my evening shows. I sort of just needed to take a break. I was really tired there for around the first part of March, and so I'm starting to feel a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to continue on the regular schedule now. So it's great. But yeah, I got sick. I got a really bad cold a while back, and it turned into like a chest infection, and I got really ill and couldn't really maintain my shows, and on top of doing Dreamcatcher Talk Radio here as well. So I thought, well, something has to go, so I sort of dropped some of my shows, and because I have a commitment really to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children to do those shows. But we have new hosts coming on there pretty soon. Volunteers that work with us, volunteering with us, will be coming on that show, which shortly. We have a couple of them that are going to be joining me, so it's going to be great. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows. And, I just want to be one more voice out here speaking out against child abuse, standing up, making some noise about child abuse and the realities that these children go through. And really one more voice just speaking about survivor issues. And this is really kind of my healing journey here in the morning. And it allows me to go through a lot of material and research material that actually is very helpful for me in my own healing journey. So that's why I just wanted to do one show in the morning to present material that I found very helpful, and hopefully it's helping somebody else, right? So I'm not a counselor or therapist. You have to listen at your own discretion. All of my shows, I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a sensitive subject, and a lot of people find it very, very upsetting. And so if you think the show might bother you, you have to turn it off. It is your discretion. So please listen at your own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I ask that you have to my shows. And the reason why is because there's a lot of adult material on my shows. And also I don't know how young the people are who are listening. And so I just ask that, you should be protected at all times. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're standing up to try to fight to save children's lives, and we're all volunteers. And you need to learn how to keep yourself safe online. And so if you're going to listen to my show, I ask that you have an adult, a parent or a caregiver who's older who can help you make a decision whether you should be listening to my show, right? Thanks very much. I appreciate it. So we'll get right into the show. And this topic is Dysfunctional Families. It was written by George A. Boyd. It's from the Mudrashram Institute of Spiritual Studies, www.mudrashram.com, M-U-D-R-A-S-H-R-A-M, mudrashram.com. It's called When You Grow Up in a Dysfunctional Family by George A. Boyd, 1992. It's a little bit older article, but this particular website's got some interesting information on it regarding dysfunctional families. Healthy families, dysfunctional families, what's the difference? The different roles that people play within these dysfunctional families, and, just the whole negative sort of behaviors that we take on, right? And this is kind of the area that we're in right now. We're about 3/4 of the way through the article, so it won't take very long to go through the rest of it, probably the rest of this week, and we can finish it off. But I just think this is really interesting information for myself. And metaprogramming is where we left off, which I didn't know anything about. Metaprogramming, George A. Boyd says, means directing or changing your behavior and conditioning from an even deeper portion of you, called the metaconscious mind. Metaconscious mind brings the following functions to bear on your basic conditioning. So it's resolution, rehearsal. What else does he list here? Argument, planning, reflection, insight, self-awareness. And where did we leave off? Let's see, on Saturday. Or reflection, thinking about the consequences of your behavior, getting ideas for alternative ways of acting, feeling, believing, or thinking. So, if we've grown up with, a lot of dysfunction and haven't been shown, proper, healthy behaviors, right? Then reflection. We need to think about the consequences of our behavior and getting ideas for alternative ways of acting, feeling, believing, or thinking, alternative ways of behaving, right? Insight is the next one, looking at yourself objectively with the eye of the mind. This allows you to witness your behavior, conditioning, and defenses against change. So our internal eye, looking at ourselves objectively with the eye of the mind. So I guess that would be like our internal eye, looking at ourselves from the inside and seeing and actually seeing our behavior, learning to actually be able to notice what our behavior is. And I think a lot of times people who grow up in dysfunctional homes, I say this quite a bit because, it's almost like when you grow up in a dysfunctional home and you don't see, any real healthy examples of what healthy relationships are, healthy boundaries, healthy proper behavior within the home. And this just goes on year after year after year after year. You're just kind of programmed as a child to behave, think, and act a certain way. And, children can't help that, you know what I mean? Like children are little sponges and they're just going to pick up whatever's going on around them. So whatever kind of attitudes, whatever kind of behaviors are going on within the home, if it's a constant, steady thing, and then that's what the child will pick up. So if the home is healthy, if it's a healthy home with a lot of healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, everyone's, doing the best they can to get along, and there's no real, violence. There's no problems. The family gets, when there is a problem, the family comes together. They problem solve. They learn to work things through. There's nobody abusing anybody. It's, that's like a healthy family. But when you grow up in a family where there's no one's working together on any level except for abusive, and it's just dysfunctional and completely, abusive, behaviors from that, from whoever's around. So I was mimicking my parents' behaviors at a very young age because that's what I was being taught. And so my behavior when I was really young was really not that good. And, I was abusive, really. I was an abusive little kid, so I didn't make friends very well. The little friends that I would get in contact with, that I had anything to do with, if they did something to me that I didn't like, I would just do what my parents would do, which would be to yell and call them names, slap them around. And I did that all the way through elementary school, and even a little bit into junior high. In high school, I took on an attitude of, I'll get you before you get me, sort of thing, and became kind of a person who I presented myself as a really tough person, and that was a form of protection. Really, I just didn't want to take any more garbage off anybody, and didn't want to take any more abuse off of anybody, and so I became the bully type, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't necessarily going around pushing people around, but people knew that I was serious, that I was not fooling around, and that they were not going to be able to bother me. My high school was actually a school full of gangs and all kinds of problems. We had the SWAT team there on a regular basis with the tear gas and the police running around and people getting stabbed and killed in that area. There was always fights and stuff like that. It was very much a gang territory school, and there was all kinds of problems within it. So, I just took on an attitude like, don't mess with me because, I don't want any more abuse, and I was just really sick and tired of it. So it kind of pushed me to be that way, right? So these behaviors, they're not really our fault. It's a lot of times, especially growing up as a child in these types of homes and these types of communities, these types of cities, you take on these behaviors and these roles. But I got a little bit older and I started to realize, like, I started working and I started seeing other people's behaviors and, older people's behaviors who they seemed quite normal, I started to realize that my behaviors were a little bit out of place out of sync with theirs, and my attitudes and my beliefs and everything else, right? So I started to kind of try to change things around as an older teen, really even more into my 20s. And so I was still having a lot of problems in my teen years. But we have to be able to look at that. Sometimes we don't recognize those behaviors. That's, I think, what they're saying here. Looking at yourself objectively, like with insight, looking at yourself objectively with the eye of the mind. This allows you to witness your behavior, conditioning, and defenses against change. And, a lot of times we don't even know our behaviors are negative, or that they're damaging, or that we're self-injuring or self-sabotaging, right? A lot of times people don't know that because if they grow up a certain way and that's just the norm for them, how would they really know any different? unless they really started to look around and see what was going on with other people in other types of situations and relationships, and start to see that, wow, look at the way that my family behaves, and look at the way that these people behave, and it's completely different. And that's what I was always doing. I think I've always been curious, maybe, enough to look around, right? Enough to see the difference. I know I talked to my sister quite a bit about this stuff from our past. Well, I don't talk to her anymore because I cut her off, but before, back when we were still talking, we would talk about this stuff growing up in the home that we did. We were the closest siblings. She was the closest sibling to me, 5 years older, and so we are out of 7 siblings. There's only 3 of us left. So me and my sister, we do talk about stuff once in a while, and the dysfunction within the home and stuff. But my sister doesn't. She never ever did sort of take a look at these other families, at their examples, and see that they were different. We'll be talking about something, and I'll be like, yeah, blah blah blah, something to do with another family, and that I realized that those people were living a lot differently than we were. And she'd be like, well, I wasn't even paying attention to that stuff. Like, my sister was more closed off. She was more I think it was a matter, it was a way for her to protect herself. She basically kind of disassociated, you know what I mean? She has very, very little memories of what would happen. Even though I can tell her exactly what was happening and what she said and what we were doing, she doesn't know what she was doing, right? So she has a hard time getting in touch with her behaviors and with what's going on in her life even today, because she's still kind of disassociative, right? But whether she ever wants to get help with that, it's her own choice, right? And I can't force her to. I can't say, well, you should. I mean, it's up to her to want to make those changes. She knows what I'm doing, right? She knows I'm on my healing journey, and she actually, before I actually cut her off, she was talking about, that she should join me in this, in this healing journey. But I think it was too hard for her, because she wants to be able to maintain this relationship with my dad, my abuser dad, who's almost 90 years old. And she probably feels that the only way she can do that is by just being in denial, right? Because, my dad is still toxic. He's still, he's mentally ill, right? Let's just put it that way. And so it's not, I would say, well, is it his fault? Well, not necessarily. That mental illness is just something that he never got any help with. And it did cause the destruction of our family, which is really unfortunate, Because my dad on his own, he has lots of friends, and most people that know him, he's the most wonderful, godly man on this earth. Of course, they don't know that he raped his wife. I talk about this on my shows every day, because the truth is truth, right? And whether people want to believe the truth or accept the truth or, deal with the truth, well, I'm sorry, but truth is truth. It just is, right? And so for all these people to think my dad is this godly man and he's such a lovely man, he's a wonderful man, they don't know what's going on in his heart. He's still very much an evil man, right? Except for he doesn't make evil statements to other people, and I think sometimes he does to his family. Like, I've cut them all off now, but last year or the year before, he was still making these evil statements, and he just has evil in his heart, right? And I can see that. And his family knows that. That's my 2 siblings and myself, right? But he's so snowed and blinded everybody else. They think he's just this wonderful, nice old man, and they have no idea what he really is, right? And so it's just kind of, it's kind of sad. My sister doesn't want to get any help, because that would mean that she would have to face and confront all this stuff, and that would change the way she felt about my dad, I'm sure of it. And so she wants to be able to maintain this dysfunctional, codependent, garbage relationship with my dad, and so she won't face it, right? So I don't know, it's her own choice, right? I've cut them all off recently because I just realized that I can't take any more of their toxic garbage, and I just refuse. And since they won't acknowledge my healing journey, they won't acknowledge the book that I wrote, they won't acknowledge any of it, even though they know about it, and they aren't supportive towards me anyway, right? So it's not like they were a big support in my life. It was really easy to cut them off. Sometimes I don't see or talk to them for 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. So what difference does it make anyway, right? It's not like we were close, right? We were never close. My family and I, like all of my siblings, none of us were close, and I had a lot of anger and animosity towards each other. So it's not like we were a loving, caring family. That's the whole issue, right? That's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, to come forward and voice out here for people, you know what I mean, and to stop child abuse, because this is, there's lots and lots of people who have had to deal with this and had to grow up with this. It's absolutely horrific. But I think so. Yeah, like sometimes it's hard for us to even witness, like to even self assess the situation, even for ourselves, that we're doing these things that are self-sabotaging, or that our behaviors are definitely, damaging or dysfunctional or just, improper, right? And I've had people point stuff out to me over many years, a period of many years, that, have made me change a lot of my behaviors, because I'm kind of open to constructive criticism. Like I don't put up with anybody abusing me now. So I mean, as far as abuse goes, forget that. But people who give me constructive criticism, for instance, life coaches. I've had life coaches talk to me about certain things that they spotted that I was doing that was self-sabotage, and they were truly trying to help me out, which was great, because I took that information to heart and I really worked on it. And that was, to not quit jobs just because I was unhappy with the boss or unhappy with something or feeling mistreated or whatever, because that's just my way of dealing with things. I don't want any confrontation. I'm sick and tired of screaming and yelling. I'm tired of people yelling at me, and I'm tired of people being abusive towards me. So confrontation is a huge issue for me. That's the one behavior that I've had to change. I've had to learn how to deal with as proper, how to handle anger, how to handle confrontation, right? And so that's a huge issue for me. So, I've had life coaches actually, and life coaches point this stuff out to me, and job counselors and whatnot. And that's really cool, and other things as well, like little things that I've been doing to sort of self-sabotage that I really didn't even realize I was doing. I mean, I knew I was quitting jobs. Cognitively I know what I'm doing, but I didn't realize that I was doing it for because of the abuse or the dysfunction that I lived through and suffered through, right? These things I didn't even realize that I changed the way I felt and thought about this, and that I do have the power and the control to not let people abuse me, and that I can have control in the situation as far as my behaviors go. And I don't have to quit jobs. I can have confrontation that will be, to the benefit of everybody. And that's peaceful resolution. It doesn't mean you have to start fighting and duking it out and, making a big scene, right? Which is what I used to do. If somebody pushed me to the limit, I would make a scene. I've been thrown out of airports, concerts, and, it's my behavior. If I'm pushed, I become that little person again who's like not going to take any more abuse, right? And so I'm starting to learn how to get all that under control, out of just to try to work through this stuff. But if we don't have the insight to look within ourselves, to see our behaviors and all that, conditioning and defenses against change, we will, chances are if somebody doesn't point it out and we don't see it, we'll just continue on in those behaviors. And that's the bad part about growing up in an abusive home. Because then if we have children, chances are we'll pass that on to our children without even knowing it, right? That's what my parents did. I mean, my parents knew they were doing wrong. They were busted on child abuse charges. But the thing is a lot of their behaviors they thought were fine, because even my dad today, because he's schizophrenic, right? He thinks his behaviors are okay, right? He thinks it was okay that he raped his wife and that he hurt his family and destroyed his family, and he just thinks that's fine. To him, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And he puts all the blame on my mom. He puts all the blame on the devil, the 1960s, and all this stuff. And he refuses to take responsibility for his behavior and his actions. And he's an evil man. Like even today he says things like, well, not today, but before I cut him off last year, he was saying stuff like, yeah, I suppose, if a person kills everybody in the world, they would still go to heaven. Things like this. This is what he's always thinking about, is murder and death and the devil. His mind is warped. I mean, the man is a sick man, right? And he's, he should have been on medication or I don't know what he should have been on, but all I know is he should have had clinical help years and years and years ago to try to get his issues under control, because he's schizophrenic, right? He sees the devil all the time. We are the devil. Like his children were the devil. His wife was the devil. His family's the devil. Even my niece, after my mom passed away, when my dad was staying with my sister, after my mom passed away, my dad stayed with my sister for 5 years. Nearly drove her absolutely crazy. That's why she moved up to Canada. She actually moved away and live with her anymore, which she won't admit because she doesn't want my dad to be mad at her, but who cares? The truth is the truth. And so she had to move 2,000 miles away so that he wouldn't follow her because she was driven crazy by him. So the thing is my niece was playing a flute one morning in the living room, and my dad thought it was the devil. My sister wasn't home, so my dad came running out into the living room naked, screaming at the top of his lungs for my niece, saying, "Devil, get out of here!" He calling my niece the devil, and thinking that she was the devil. He probably saw the devil. I wouldn't doubt it, because my dad is schizophrenic. He is messed up. And so here's my niece sitting there playing the flute, watching her, 70-year-old, 72-year-old naked grandfather screaming at her, "Devil, get out of here!" This is the kind of person that he is, right? It's not good. And he needed help a long, long time ago. And do I feel bad that he didn't get help? No. It was his responsibility. He had a chance when the courts busted them. The courts actually made them go get mandatory psychiatric evaluations. And my parents were both diagnosed mentally ill. My dad was diagnosed borderline schizophrenic at the time, which I think they misdiagnosed him. He is totally schizophrenic. My mother was diagnosed manic depressive. And so did they get any help? No, because that was 1967. So, back then, did they enforce this stuff? No, they still have a hard time enforcing this stuff, even today. So think about that. Look how many kids slip through the cracks today. So it's not any surprise that we slip through the cracks as well. And so do I blame the system? No, I blame my parents, right? We got to put the blame where it goes. I'm really tired of seeing people blaming everybody else, blaming the system, blaming somebody else. My dad blames everybody else for what he did to his wife and his children. My mother always blamed my dad and everybody else for what she did to the family. I'm real tired of people blaming other people for abuse. Abuse is abuse. The person to blame is the person who is doing the abusing. And I don't care whether they're mentally ill or not. They are the ones responsible for the abuse, and so therefore that's who the blame and the shame goes to, right? The system does need change, and the system does need work, but the thing is if people would stop abusing their children, that system wouldn't even have to be there. And that's the whole issue. But people that are so screwed up, adults, parents, and everybody else, caregivers, grandmothers, grandfathers, everybody, they're all so screwed up that, they just mess all these children's lives up because they're screwed up. That's who to blame, not the system. The system would not be necessary if people would stop mistreating and abusing their children. So there you go. You've got to put the blame where it goes. Self-awareness, that's the next one. The awareness of your total personality from the vantage point of the self. And the center is the nucleus of the personality and is experienced as a center of awareness, will, and joy, director and controller of your life. That's interesting. Self-awareness, the awareness of your total personality from the vantage point of the self. Taking a look at our total awareness of our personality. This center is the nucleus of the personality and is experienced as a center of awareness, will, and joy, director and controller of our life. It's kind of interesting, being self-aware. I don't know a whole lot about this kind of stuff. I don't study this type of stuff, you know what I mean? As far as, I don't know what this would be, but it's midrashram.com, Spiritual Institute of Spiritual Studies. I haven't really gotten into, this kind of stuff, but it's interesting to me, you know what I mean? So, taking a look at our self-awareness, right? Our personality, our whole personality, which I get, they say is the center of awareness, will, which is, our will, our drive, what we will do, you know what I mean? Like what we will, right? Joy, director and controller of our life. That's interesting. The will is the internal controlling and ordering principle that operates through the human personality and gives expression to impulses from yet higher aspects of the mind. The superconscious mind, the human spirit, and the soul. Yeah, well, I know the will is associated with the spirit, the soul. For either programming or metaprogramming to operate effectively, they must be empowered and given permission by the will. That's interesting. So the will is actually the director and controller. That's interesting. Will is the connection with the deepest principles within a human being, and is the manifestation of his or her essential self. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting way to look at that. Because, when I say, well, people say, okay, I will do that tomorrow, or yes, I will do that, or no, I will not do that. That's kind of interesting because we don't think of it as being, the manifestation of our total self is what we will do and what we will not do, what we will say, what we will not say, what we will have happen in our lives and what we will not have happen in our lives, So will is a huge thing, I know I study the Bible. I do my show here on Sundays, as most people know, and talking about the will, is this kind of quite very common really throughout the Bible. And for our wills, I didn't realize that by this being explained this way, that that's the manifestation of his or her essential self. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Well, I guess what is your words and your deeds are really what make up your personality and yourself, right? It's what you do, and it's what you say, Because if we were all just sitting in big lumps on the ground, really not doing anything, just sitting there breathing, well, we would just be inanimate objects. We wouldn't be doing anything. We'd just be sitting there just on the ground, and we would never communicate, contact each other. We would never do anything. We would just sit there like lumps on the ground. So therefore, we wouldn't be the beings that we are, And it's because every morning, it's like, okay, I'm going to get up. It's my will that I'm going to get up in the morning, right? And I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go do that, right? And I'm not going to do this, which is my will to not do that, or I'm going to say this. It's my will to say this or say that. So it does make up sort of, I guess, the encompass who we really are. And I have heard that, throughout, just in my Bible studies and stuff. But I've never seen it presented this way. That's quite interesting. So see, George A. Boyd says behavior is largely the end result of the internal conditioning embedded in the subconscious mind. Affirmation and metaprogramming allow you to alter this programming in the subconscious mind, and this helps you to begin to take charge of your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, and ultimately your life. And by rediscovering your will, you are reunited with your core, your essential being, and this gives you the power to regain control over your life and affairs and to take it back from those to whom you have given it away, or by codependent styles of relating. So that's interesting. Yeah, codependency is a bad thing, and I didn't even really know a whole lot about it until I did the work on it a while back, I guess it was last fall or something, when I was really taking a look at codependency, because I didn't really know a whole lot about it, but I figured that our family was codependent, and I had heard it from other people. And I thought, well, what's codependent? I never even really understood what it was. And it's really bad news. You give your life away doing that, because you don't live for yourself, you live for somebody else. And you expect somebody else to live their life for you, and you never ever really live your life. And so therefore you give your will away, right? And then at the end of the road you're screaming and upset because you're like, well, I lost myself, and ultimately it is our fault and our responsibility for it when that type of stuff happens. Even though we may have grown up in a codependent home and whatnot, we have the choice to get help. And so, you know what I mean? Like, sadly enough, people have to deal with this stuff and put through this stuff. At the end of the road, my mother was still this miserable woman on her deathbed who had never ever, reached out for help. And she was the victim, so much the victim, and crying the blues about how awful and horrible her life was, and that her children could not bring her happiness, and that nothing could, and that we were all just worthless and useless, right? And that's what happens to people when you live your life, trying to have somebody else live your life for you, or giving your life away by not living your own life and living your life for somebody else. It's very important that we don't, codependency. I really found that very helpful to get in touch with that whole thing of codependency, because my family is very, very codependent and dysfunctional, and they live their lives just within this codependency, and it's so disturbing and so dysfunctional. And to think that people would waste their lives in this situation. I was doing that for 41 years. Well, cognitively, I don't know, not 41 years, but 41 years of age, and finally figuring it out that I needed to start to live for myself, to live, period. Right? And shouldn't it take people that long, right? But my mom never learned it, and she was on her deathbed at the age of 68, and she died a miserable, unhappy woman. So, it's my good example, sadly enough, that my mother set for me. That was the only example that I actually took to heart, and that was not to do what my mother has done, and not to do what my father has done, to completely go the opposite direction that my parents went, right? Because they did the wrong things. They did the complete wrong things. And so they were a real good example for me of what not to do, right? And so it's been, sadly enough, their lives have been, that's what their lives were made of. And at the end of the road, all it did was show me a picture of how not to make the same mistakes that they did, right? And end up like them, right? And so I'm glad I finally figured it out. But it takes time, and we have to work through this stuff. So make sure you get some help, And if you have a hard time coping, and you can't cope, and you just don't know how you're going to get through this and how you're going to get through the day, well, it's ultimately up to you, and you have to make the right choice, and that is to get help. So whether that's talking to a counselor, or therapist, or talking to a good friend, or if you want to just go self-help because you don't want to talk to anybody about it, make the choice to go just to help yourself, which is what I've done. And if you want to, and plus I have a lot of good friends, which is really great. Not everybody does, right? And I didn't have a lot of good friends for a lot of years. So, you make sure you call a crisis line then. But it is ultimately your responsibility to do that. And so you have to take that responsibility, right? We, just like my parents trying to blame everybody else. Oh, it was somebody else's responsibility, blah, blah, blah. That whole thing doesn't fly, right? And at the end of the road, you're only lying to yourself. You're just lying to yourself and everybody else by just blaming other people for your own behaviors. And that's why I'm working on changing my behaviors. I can't blame everybody for my behaviors right now, because it is ultimately up to me to make sure that I'm well and that I'm happy. And I can't change the past, but I can change today, and I can change the future. So that's why it's really important to not allow this kind of stuff to destroy us, and to learn how to work through it and move forward, right? So make sure you do get some help, right? Call a crisis line if you have to, but you make sure you stick around and you do the right thing by yourself, and get some help, right? Everybody, talk to you later. I got my show tonight as well as Dreamcatchers Talk Radio on here, and so I'll be around later tonight. If you need something, get a hold of me here on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook and whatnot. I'll be around. So have a great day, everybody. Take care.